Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Rajat Kandhari from New Delhi, India, from Dr. Kandhari Skin and Dental Clinic. And today I'm here to talk to you about sun protection essentials. So, what are the essentials when we talk about sun protection? So, before we jump into the meat of the subject, we need to understand why we actually need sun protection. And for that, we need to understand the UV radiation spectrum. So, the UV rays are basically comprised of three aspects. One, the UVC, the UVB, and the UVA. Now, the UVC is the part of the UV spectrum which is completely blocked off by the atmosphere and it's not reaching the Earth's surface. The UVB is the part which reaches about 5 to 10% to the Earth's surface, and the UVA is about 90% of what is actually reaching the Earth's surface. Now, what's the difference between these? Now, UVB is the one which is predominant in causing sunburn, and it also causes the pigmentation process to increase. However, UVA is the one which causes immune defects. It plays with the DNA, it plays with the nucleic acids inside your skin, and it can, in fact, predispose you to more chances of getting skin cancers. Alarming, isn't it? So, which is why it's so important that we, in fact, use good sun protection, particularly on days when we're out in the sun. And for those of you who are working more outdoors or are into sports, it's pertinent that please use your sunscreen and practice good sun protection essentials. Now, what are sun protection essentials? So, of course, there are some basic ones which we'll come to later, but first let's start with what kind of sunscreen should we use. Now, in certain countries, from a very early age, in fact, in school, children are taught something called the slip, slop, slap campaign. That means you use your sunscreen and they're taught how to do it very early on, because even sun exposure starting at early age can predispose you to later developed skin carcinomas. So the sunscreen you should use should have few things. Number one, we've heard everyone talk about broad spectrum sunscreen. What does this really mean? This means that out of this spectrum, your sunscreen is giving you coverage in the UVB part of the spectrum, so protecting you against those burns. And what measures the UVB part of the spectrum? It's your SPF, and it also gives you protection against the UVA part of the spectrum, right? So it's a broad spectrum sunscreen, and now you'll also have certain sunscreens which you'll see that it offers blue light or visible light protection. The light which is coming onto you from your screens, from your phone screens, from your lights in your house. And it's important that you protect yourself against those as well, because that can in fact lead to enhanced pigmentation. So coming back to the subject, so broad spectrum protection, which is a UVB and a UVA coverage, you want to look for certain things in your sunscreen such as zinc oxide, titanium dioxide, avobenzone, tinosorb S, Juvenile A+. These are broad spectrum filters which provide you a good coverage. If you look further into your sunscreen label, you might have to see something which is known as critical wavelength. This critical wavelength suggests that your sunscreen in fact justifies the claim of broad spectrum. So a critical wavelength of about 370 nanometers or above is going to give you a broad spectrum coverage. At least an SPF of 30, right? So 30 SPF or more is a good enough sunscreen provided it is applied properly, right? So to get that proper SPF, you're supposed to apply 1 milligram per centimeter square, and that's quite a bit. So it is said that 2 fingers is the amount of sunscreen you actually require to cover your face and neck. And how many of us actually do that? Not very many. So the idea is that apply your sunscreen well. Look for the SPF label 30 plus or more, you're good to go. Also, look for UVA rating, so that PA triple plus, 4 plus, or a label which is mentioning UVA. This suggests that your sunscreen is giving you coverage in the UVA part of the spectrum as well. Number 4, is your sunscreen water resistant? This is also known as the substantivity of your sunscreen, which means that If your sunscreen is water resistant, it means that you're good for 40 minutes in the water. Let's say you're swimming or you're on the beach. So 40 minutes in the water, your sunscreen will maintain its SPF. However, if it mentions very water resistant, it means that you can go almost up to 80 minutes without the sunscreen losing its SPF efficacy. Which brings us to the next thing, which means that if you're in these conditions where you're sweating a lot, you're swimming, you're outdoors running, it is important that you reapply your sunscreen to maintain your SPF. So reapplication does two things for you. One, it gives you a proper layer again, so gives you proper protection. Secondly, it also corrects areas of misapplication. If I start applying my sunscreen from here, the most will be here, and by the time I reach here, your sunscreen will decrease in its film. So it's a good idea to reapply 20 minutes to 30 minutes after you step out. Why? Because it will correct those areas of misapplication and you'll have a proper uniform film protecting you. Number 5, use of tinted sunscreens. Tinted sunscreens are important, particularly for the skin of color, the darker races, Indians, Africans. Why? Because your sunscreen reflects your UV rays then. If your sunscreen is visible, it will in fact protect you against visible light. So that's about your sunscreen, and the rest of the stuff is simple. Seek shade, wear a wide brimmed hat, particularly if you're out on the beach, let's say. The wide brimmed hat should not be one of those hats which you pick up at the entrance of the beach, which are straw hats. It should ideally be a thicker hat which is giving you a proper coverage, something like what the cricketers used to wear or still do. Further, you should use fabric which has a slightly darker color, particularly if you're going to spend time in the sun a lot. Why? Because just like your sunscreen, your fabrics also have an SPF. So if I use a very thick fabric, let's say a polyester or a nylon versus a linen, the polyester or a nylon will score above your linen. Obviously, I understand that we can't wear polyester and nylon. So stick to cotton, stick to particularly full sleeves if you're not on the beach, etc. at least, and slightly darker colors will protect you better. A higher knit count will protect you better. I hope these few points helped all of you to understand sun protection a bit better. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and follow us for more such videos.